talk on role of men. Think about it.
This is probably a topic that we don't think too much about, but I think it's important, obviously, especially in our age. So, we might think about, well, what is the role of man? What does being a man mean? How do I live and show to myself and to others that I'm a man, that I'm a man of faith? How would I define what a real man is? What would I say, and how would I define my understanding of the role of men? This is important because the role of men will obviously be defined for us greatly by how we define that role to be. How will I pursue and live out the role as a man, especially a man of God? How will I live out my manhood? All of these things will depend greatly upon my definition of man. What does it mean to be a man? And we live in a society that gives us very conflicting pictures or definitions of what it means to be a man. In fact, I would say that in general, society's definition is a very poor and inadequate definition of what it means to be a man. It's greatly lacking. So we might ask ourselves, and what comes to mind when we hear this phrase, the role of men? You can just think about that for a minute. Maybe you can just identify if anyone has a thought in just one word. When I hear that, what's the first thought that comes to mind? What does that mean?
What?
Fatherhood? Husband? Providing? Provider? Husband? Leader? Responsible? Good. Well, those are important things, I'm glad I didn't hear some of what society probably would teach us to use words to define the role of men, like macho and number one and that type of thing. But you probably more than myself are quite aware of how society treats this theme, especially maybe with different workplaces. Obviously, others, men in general, try to live out this ideal, this definition of the role of men. Being a man in the real sense of the word is not something then that's centered on ourselves, and that's the problem with most of the way the world looks at the role of men. It's me. I'm the most important, and I'm going to show how important I am, how I dominate, and how I have to have only my way, and everything has to revolve around me. And so, in that sense, no one likes a bragger. We don't like to listen to people like that. In fact, they often turn us off. So we're always more impressed, though, and more so inspired by men who give up themselves to others. We're not impressed by someone who just talks big about themselves. We're more impressed by how someone lives that out in giving themselves in service to others instead of just service to themselves. That always impresses anyone. It doesn't make any difference what culture you're from or what language you speak. That's a universal language. To see how someone gives good witness in service to others. This is something very important about our role as men. True men living well their role as men are men who are at the service of others. Things as simple as, for those of us who live older, like myself, we'll remember a common thing. You see it again, but you don't see it all that often anymore. When especially a lady would come to a door, you open the door for her. Or whatever it might be. If you see, I remember as a small boy, it was quite common if a gentleman was walking down the street and encountered a woman and come the opposite way, he'd tip his hat. He had a hat on, you know. So just those common ways, which we don't see anymore, or all that often, in which the focus is the other person. It's not me. It's not me. And so, service to others. And this makes a difference by the good that we do in the lives of others. Our role as men is defined by how we give ourselves in loving service to others, and that's what makes all the difference. Real men do that. Real men do that. An example for, again, those of you, and like myself, who might be a little bit older, you know, just looking at, considering some of the TV programs, think back. You know, when I was a kid, the popular programs, I remember, and this dates myself, but, you know, it's true because this is the focus of those other-centered programs. Programs like Father Knows Best, Ozzie and Harriet, Superman, The Rifleman, The Lone Ranger, I Love Lucy, My Three Sons, and you might know others. But the focus was always, in those programs, you know, addressing my family, being a father, even like that program, My Three Sons, a widowed father, concerned with the guidance and the teaching and the upbringing of his sons. He wanted to bring up good, godly men. We don't see those programs anymore. So, again, the focus is other. All of these programs defined and supported a good and healthy understanding of how to live out our role as men. Many of these programs greatly influenced and promoted the Judeo-Christian values that they were based on. God was regarded as our loving and caring Father. In those old programs, it was not uncommon to hear reference to God, to see examples of people praying, churches, to see, you know, in some of those programs, figures like a priest, things like that. So God took a prominent role, and he was at the basis of the morals that many of those programs were trying to promote and to foster. In a certain sense, this shouldn't surprise us, because as we hear in the Bible in the beginning, like in the book of Genesis, we read that we're made in God's image and likeness. And so, man, in that sense, if we're made in God's image and likeness, it shouldn't surprise us that it's almost something that's innate in us as men in particular, to reflect God-given nature, this God-given nature of ourselves, to how we live in service to others. It's something natural. We all know that each of us would feel more fulfilled in our role as men when we experience our service directed towards others as opposed to just to ourselves, or lived out in some selfish way. And so in short, our role as men is, it won't be discovered or found in any selfish attention or pursuits, but only when it's focused upon in loving service towards others. That's how we'll discover better what our role is as men and what it means to be a man, directed towards others. Then how do we discover and begin to live out our role as men? Well, I'd say that first of all, we have to be rooted in the source of our manhood, and that would be God. God. We need to be men who make God the source of their being. Men who realize that only in relationship with God will they come to learn, to discover, and how and what it means to be true men. We need to have the role of models also of real men of faith, who can inspire us, and with godly goodness we can see and desire to imitate. And so for us, this is why we pick St. Joseph in particular, because he's the most common man saint. He's someone that we can easily identify with because he's most like us. No pun intended, but most of us are regular Joes in the sense that, We see Joseph was a hard-working man. He was a family man. He wanted to provide well for his family, take care of them. That's what all of us want as well. We want the same thing. And so we see a man of God like St. Joseph who's able to be truly a man who stands up for his faith in God and continues to serve well the interests of his family. And so this is why we hold up St. Joseph in a particular way for us. St. Joseph is the true role model of men of godly faith. He's the most real, he's the most tangible example of what the role of men should be. So there are certain qualities that we see in St. Joseph that we should strive after if we want to be fulfilled in our role as men of faith. So what I'd like to do is just go over a few of those. The first one I'd like to focus upon is that of being a man of faith. We see that obviously in the life of St. Joseph. God showed St. Joseph how to be a real man and experience true manly peace and fulfillment in his life by letting God lead him. He let God lead him. He invited God into his life. For us, sometimes that's real difficult because some of us have grown up with the mentality to be a man means I stand on my own. No one tells me what to do. I take charge. Even if the results are disastrous, I take charge. And St. Joseph was not that way. He always made God a part of everything he did. Invited God into his life to lead him and to guide him. He did this by always putting God first. He never relied only on his own wits or his talents or even his experience, but always included God in his decisions, his endeavors, and all of his concerns. So that in all circumstances, he would fulfill his role as a man of godly faith in his service to Mary and Jesus most especially. So we have to be men of faith. We really have to be men of faith. That means we have to include God in our lives on a regular basis, a daily basis. Not just when we find ourselves in problems, struggles, and difficulties. We also see in the life of St. Joseph that he was obviously a protector and a defender. To protect and defend life, others, and the truth helps us define us as men of faith. God is our great protector and defender, especially from sin and death. And so it shouldn't again surprise us that as we're made in God's image and likeness, that we're called to be men who imitate this need and desire to protect and defend. And for us as men, that's something that's natural. It's just how God made us. It's natural for us as men to want to protect and to defend, especially when we talk about people like our spouses or our children or someone who needs defending. Most of us would step in and do what we can, even if it means sacrifice in the sense that we may be injured in some way. One of the things that's most damaged us in this area of being a protector and defender is that of abortion. Abortion is the most destructive way that men violate their natural and God-given need to protect and defend the greatest gift that we receive, which is the gift of life. And we have to recognize it for that. Also, along with that, of course, is the great plague of pornography that our country is enrolled in as well during these times. These are things that take away from this God-given virtue of courage and wanting to protect and wanting to defend. And we need to reclaim that again. We need to reclaim that and remind ourselves that God has given us what we need to be good protectors and good defenders for our family. All we need to do is to say yes to that and to bring that to mind on a regular basis, especially in prayer, and asking God for the grace and the strength to be able to be the good protectors and defenders of our faith and of our families the way that God knows that we're capable of doing. And we live in a day and an age that makes that somewhat of a challenge because we shouldn't be too surprised if in a certain sense we're going to receive maybe ridicule, we're going to receive opposition, we're going to receive contention when we stand up and want to protect and defend the good of others, especially the good of our faith. So we go to St. Joseph and we see this very needed virtue of courageous faith in protecting and defending. We also see that he was a man who knew what it means to work and to provide for his family. And for us as men, that's something that again is so ingrained within us that we can say that it's almost innate within us. Every man wants to be a good provider for his family. And we all know that if a man can't provide for his family, even though it has nothing to do, in many cases, with, of course, his feeling of self-worth, we almost always tie it up with that. If I can't provide for my family, then that says I'm not a good man. Of course, that's not necessarily true, but that's what I mean by this is such a part of us as men. We need to address this area. We need to realize this is partly how God has made us. And again, it shouldn't surprise us as I keep going back to this image of being made in God's image and likeness. We see that God was a worker in how we hear the story of creation. He worked. That's how the book of Genesis describes what God did. He created the world in 7 days. And he provided. He provided for the greatest act of his creation, which was human beings. Provided the Garden of Eden and everything that they needed. His focus was his love for the greatest act of his creation, which was humankind. And so, the fact that, again, we're made in God's image and likeness shouldn't surprise us that we too, as made in God's image and likeness, have this need to want to work, to want to provide, to want to produce in a certain sense. God, of course, made everything out of nothing. We can't do that, but we can certainly make good things and provide good things out of the things around us. And it's part of us as men to want to, in that sense, imitate this attribute of God by taking things, using them, and to manipulate them in a good way and produce some good, some fruit out of it to provide for the well-being, especially of our families and those we love. And so, providing and working expresses God's dominance over creation, in which we also share in Him with that. We too, in reflection of God, can use creation for a higher good. The well-being of our family and others. All men find gratification and meaning in their self-worth and their ability to work and to provide for their families and loved ones, which, again, is rooted in how we're made in God's image and likeness. The last area I'd like to focus upon is we see in the life of St. Joseph, he was also a teacher. Now, just because we don't have one recorded word from his lips in Scripture doesn't mean that he wasn't a teacher. All we need to do is to look at the life of Jesus, and we can see that probably many of the things we see in Jesus' life are things that Jesus learned, at least on a worldly basis, from St. Joseph. He learned as a man from St. Joseph. And of course, we begin with Joseph's talents of being a carpenter, and pass that right on to Jesus as well. So he taught Jesus good things that he wanted to pass on for the good. And that's what all of us, again, as men are also called to do. We want to pass on good things to others, especially to our children. We want to pass them on in the sense that those good things far outlive us. All of us, I'm sure, here would say that especially, for those of you who are fathers of families and grandfathers and so forth, what's more important to you is that your children, your grandchildren, and great-grandchildren and so forth learn some essential value, moral teaching that you want to pass on to them, that would help their life and make their life better. What's more important than having a famous name? You see it in how you want to teach and pass on the good things that God has given us. You want those things to outlive our earthly existence. This, in a certain sense, again, goes back to this idea of being made in God's image and likeness, in the sense that we see that it speaks of wanting to promote this idea of eternity. God is eternal. God has no beginning, God will have no end. God always has been. God is eternal. And in the way in which we as men want to teach and pass on the good things, in a certain sense, that's how we also begin to reflect this inner desire that probably comes from God again, to want to enjoy the things that last forever, things that are eternal. And we don't want to just keep those to ourselves, but we want to pass them on to those whom we love. We want to share those things with them as well. Just like God's eternity is not something that He is limited to Himself. He's invited us into that eternity with Him because of His love for us. And so the goodness that we pass on to others becomes a reflection of God's eternity, in whose image and likeness again we have all been made. And so, it's important for us to call to mind these characteristics that we see in the life of St. Joseph. He was a man of faith. He was protector and defender for his family. He provided for them in his work. And he also passed on to them the example of good teaching and of good living. And this is what we're all called to do in our role as men of faith as well. So I'd like to end just by saying that probably there has been no other time in the history of man in which the need for the role of men is more needed or more important than it is in our time. There's been no other time in history, in that sense, in which the role of men has been more under attack than it is in our time. So, this is a time in which we need to call upon courage from St. Joseph, asking him to help us to be men of faith, to be men who protect and defend, to be men who work and provide, and to be men who teach and give godly witness. So, this is what we're called to do as men of faith, and this is our role as men of God. So what I'd like to do now is, if there's any questions, or we can go right into our questions that we like to share with others.
Father says he has more handwriting than I do, but I think that's more to do. Let's see. I'm going to read them. Just so if I can read them, I think I rubbed some of it off as I was leaving it up there. What role of man do I see as most needed in the world today? What manly role do I admire most in St. Joseph? I want to imitate. And what godly role as men do I most need to live out this week? Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and it's kind of ground rules for our breakout session.